Good morning, all. We're at the appointed hour, so let me call to order the meeting of the Region of Peel for Thursday, May 9th. Roll call. Madam Clerk, all members are present except Mayor Crombie, who is on other municipal business, Councillor Demerla, Councillor Dasko, who is on other municipal business, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Kovac is here, Councillor Sado advises that she is ill, and all other members are present.
Councillor Fortini's mother's sick in Italy.
I'm sorry to hear that. And Councillor Bertini has someone that's not feeling well in the family. Thank you, Mayor Brown. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Approval of the minutes from April 25th, 2019, and the clerk advises me that there may be a little housekeeping involved. I have a resolution from the clerk that reads that the resolution 2019-370 contained in the minutes of the April 25, 2019 Regional Council meeting be amended to include the following, and further that staff report to the Planning Advisory Committee on possible incentives for working with the development community in the interest of climate change measures, and further that the minutes of the April 25, 2019 Regional Council meeting be approved as amended. Councillor Parrish?
I'm going to try a kinder, gentler approach this week.
Okay, right back at you.
On page 195 of the minutes, I
Okay.
asked that the regional chair relay to council what he told the provincial advisors. Your answer was if the three mayors do. Two of the mayors have done articles in the Toronto Star. The third mayor has shared their position. Can we expect at some point that you will prepare your remarks for us?
I would be happy to, Councillor Parrish. Two ideas. Number one, when all of the mayors are in attendance, perhaps if we all were to speak to the issue, I'd be more than happy to. If you'd like us to provide it in writing for the next meeting, I'd be happy to do that. Whatever the group thinks.
I think in writing for the next meeting would be.
So long as, and what I like about that is, if I may say, that way the clerk's responsible that all four have written in. I have them all. Let's put them on an agenda.
Perfect.
Does that seem appropriate?
It seems delightful.
Excellent. I'd be happy.
See?
I think direction from the correspondence is
So
fine.
I don't need to move a motion,
Okay.
or do I?
I'm asking the clerk.
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes, I'm told. So that all the mayors know they're responsible for the same as requested by the board. So if you would move that motion.
I will move that motion
Yeah,
happily.
seconded by Councillor Ras. All those in favor, that is carried. And well done, Caroline. I think that's a very appropriate
And I
solution.
thank you very much. This is working well. Let's
Yes.
see if it lasts the whole meeting.
Okay. Next, the minutes themselves as amended. Carolyn, would you move those as well, please, along with Councillor Ras? All those in favor? That is carried. Very good. Approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any other amendments? I have another motion for me with regards to the approval of the agenda, that the agenda for the May 9, 2019 Regional Council include a communication from the Deputy Premier and Minister of Health and Long-Term Care regarding funding to support cannabis enforcement to be dealt with under the items related to health, item 16.3, and further that the agenda for the May 9, 2019 Regional Council meeting include an oral update from the Acting Chief Administrative Officer regarding the Ernst & Young work relating to the provincial review of the regional government to be dealt with under other business, item 19.1, and further that the agenda for the May 9, 2019 Regional Council meeting include an oral update from the Commissioner of Health regarding the local Ontario Health Team to be dealt with under other business, item 19.2, and further that the agenda for the May 9, 2019 Regional Council meeting include an in-camera item regarding a personal matter about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, to be dealt with on in-camera matters, item 22.3, and further that the agenda for the May 9, 2019 Regional Council meeting be approved as amended. If I have no speakers, that has been moved by Councillors Parrish and Councillors Ras. All those in favor? That is carried. Public announcements or sponsored, or any other comments sponsored by a member of council? Seeing none. Consent agenda. We'll skip past the delegations for now. In terms of the consent agenda, the first item that I have is communication item 10.1. Madam Clerk, that's highlighted as just having come in. And it's very good. Is that on consent? That will be taken on consent. Item 11.1, tax capping policy. Do I have consent? Consent. 11.2. Consent. 11.3. Consent. Communications item 12.1. Hold. Item 12.2. Consent. 12.3. Consent. 12.4. 12.5. Skip past 13.14, item 14.1 under communications. Also on consent, 14.2. On consent, item 15.1. On consent, apologies, hold 15.1, vector-borne disease, and appropriately so, Councillor Rass, thank you, I was going too fast. 15.2, healthy menu choices. Hold. 15.3, and I believe
Yeah, that can go on consent.
that can go on consent as well. Under item 16, 16.1, communications. Consent, 16.2. Consent, under 17, items related
That's
to,
the one we just added. We just added 16.3 just a moment ago.
very good.
So it can go on consent?
Yes,
Okay.
very good. So just to be clear, 16.3 that we just added will go on consent as well. Thank you. Oh, sorry, 16.3 to be held. Very good. 17.1 on consent. 17.2 to be held appropriately so. 17.3. 17.4. 18.1 communications. On consent, other business notices, and we know we have to go in camera, so that is that. So with that, I need a motion as a recorded vote to confirm what we've done on consent. Madam Clerk. So push your button accordingly as a recorded vote.
And then that was Councillor Vicente and Mayor Thompson? That moved-
Yeah, and that was moved by Councillors Vicente and Mayor Thompson, yes. Just getting the system up and running and few more, just
Councillor Carlson?
Councillor Carlson, have you voted on the consent agenda, please? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Which brings us to staff presentations. Item 8.1, approach to the development of the 2020 budget presentation by Norm Lund, Director of Business and Financial Planning. Norm, welcome.
Good morning, Chair Yinika and members of Regional Council. I'm Norm Lum, Director of Business and Financial Planning, and I'm here today to present our proposed approach to the development of the 2020 budget. Assisting me with the presentation today is Heidi Bischoff, Supervisor of Corporate Budgeting and Reporting. Since 2016, we have recommended a net tax levy target for the following year as part of the budget process. This past January, we did not do that because of the uncertainty around the levels of provincial funding. We did provide a forecast of the net tax levy and utility rate increase for the next 3 years. For 2020, a net tax levy increase of 4.5% was forecast.
And Norm, I'm just going to add, you, of course, in your additional budget, you were given a package that I think many of you are aware of, but there's also reference to that in the package on your desk. Thank you, and carry on, Norm.
Sure. So for 2020, a net tax levy increase of 4.5% was forecast. The increase is net of assessment growth of 1.1% and includes a 1% infrastructure levy, as do the forecasts for 2021 and 2022. The forecasts reflect Council's direction to include $3 million in 2020 for the grant to Mississauga for the Molten Hub. The $3 million remains in the forecast for 2021 and comes out in 2022. For the utility rate, an average increase of 6.8% was forecast for the next 3 years, with an increase of 7.8% for 2020. All of the increases include 5% to support the state of good repair of the $24 billion in water and wastewater infrastructure. Also included in the forecast for 2020 were priorities previously directed by Council, such as the additional housing support, implementation of the butterfly model, increased community safety, waste diversion, and childcare, as well as funding to ensure our infrastructure can continue to support service delivery. So one of the key risks for the 2020 forecast is the impact from changes in provincial funding. At the last council meeting on April 25th, the CFO made a brief presentation on impacts and changes based on what was understood at that time. Over the past 2 weeks, we have received some more information and understand a little more than we did before. I'm going to present what we understand as of today and the impact on the 2020 budget. 2 weeks ago, we had reported there was an increase in the overall long-term care envelope, but now there is greater uncertainty with respect to the size of the envelope and if Peel will be allocated any of the increased funding. 2 days ago, we received a letter from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care confirming the funding for paramedic services at the 2017 budgeted level. This is a departure from their current 50-50 cost-sharing model and represents a funding impact of $6.5 million. In the Social Assistance and Employment Program, there's an overall reduction of $1.9 million in funding, mostly related to the Addiction Services Initiative. The public health program can be categorized into 3 sections when viewed through a funding lens: cost shared with the province, 100% provincially funded, and 100% property tax funded. The province has proposed changes to the ratios for the cost shared programs and introduced cost sharing to the previously 100% funded programs, effectively downloading the cost to the municipality. The combined impact for both these programs will be $5.6 million for the 2020 budget and $4.2 million prorated for 2019. If the province actually provided 70% of the cost shared programs, there would be a net increase in funding of $2.6 million, but this is unlikely. For the seniors dental program, $1.7 million was included in the 2019 budget, fully funded from property tax. Total funding of $90 million was announced by the province, but it's not known at this point if there will be any allocation to Peel. And we just learned yesterday there will be additional one-time funding for cannabis of $123,600. For the early years and childcare program, there is significant impact on the funding in a number of different program areas. Base funding for the program will be reduced by a total of $6.1 million, which includes $2 million for cost sharing of MIN, previously fully funded by the province. The provincial expansion plan will download $8.3 million in costs to the region. This previously 100% provincial funded program has been shifted to a cost shared program, where Peel will now be required to fund 20% of the cost. The fee stabilization support, for which $4.9 million in funding was included in the budget, will see its full $4.9 million in funding eliminated in 2020. One of the few programs that will see an increase is the licensed home-based childcare, for which an increase of $0.8 million is expected. The wage enhancement program will experience a reduction of $0.9 million, which includes $0.3 million due to a shift from 100% to cost sharing for admin. The early learning and childcare program has a potential reduction of $0.2 million due to a shift from 100% to cost sharing. So there have also been a number of funding announcements regarding housing and homelessness. The majority of the funding is not new. Funding for the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative was reduced by $1.3 million when compared to our budget. In the Home for Good program, the province confirmed funding consistent with the 2019 budget assumptions. Additionally, there is increased funding for the Canada-Ontario Community Housing Initiative and the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative, which were not included in the budget, but no details have been released yet regarding how these funds are to be used. So in other words, it may require a corresponding increase in spending, resulting in no net impact to the budget. Regionally controlled programs are not the only ones experiencing funding cuts. The conservation authorities have received notice that the natural hazards funding will be decreased by $0.6 million. The Peel Regional Police will also see a decrease in provincial funding for prisoner transport and other funding programs in the amount of $2.6 million. And finally, in other items in transportation, $300,000 in capital funding from Metrolinx for the Smart Commute program will be eliminated. So overall, the total impact of the changes in provincial funding will be a revenue shortfall of $38.1 million for the 2020 budget, equivalent to a 3.5% net tax levy increase or an additional $68 in taxes for the typical homeowner. This impact may be reduced by lower spending where the province no longer requires mandated service levels. Based on what we understand today for the 2021 budget, as the province downloads additional costs to the municipality by increasing Peel's share of the cost-shared programs, there will be an additional $7 million in cost, equivalent to 0.6% net tax levy increase, or an additional $13 per home. While there may be further changes announced by the province, the total estimated impact of the provincial budget is $45.1 million, or a net tax levy increase of 4.1%, representing an impact of $81 per household. The impact of provincial budget changes is significant, but the region has very limited sources or options for revenue available to mitigate the impact of these changes. Peel's budget is funded through user fees, development charges, and funding from other levels of government, with the net impact funded from property taxes. With the level of change in provincial funding, we will need to look at balancing affordable property tax rates with service levels. So at the beginning of the presentation, I had presented Council with the 3-year forecast from the 2019 budget, as shown at the top of the slide. This included a forecasted net tax levy increase of 4.5% for 2020 and 3.8% for 2021. With the changes in provincial funding, assuming service levels are maintained, the forecasted increase for 2020 increases to 8% and to 4.4% for 2021. So what I've presented so far reflects what we know today from a funding perspective. Over the next few months, each of these services or programs impacted by the provincial budget will bring reports to Council outlining the financial and service level risks, along with options to minimize the impacts on clients for 2019 and going forward into 2020 and 2021. Recognizing that the information isn't complete at this point and may change, staff are proposing that a report be brought back to Council in September that consolidates all the provincial funding changes, the impacts to services and service levels, as well as the risk to achieving a budget target that is in line with inflation. For 2020, staff is proposing an interim budget target of 2.9%, net of assessment growth of 1.1%, to guide the development of the budget. This target is at the upper end of the inflation range of 1 to 3%. Given the level of provincial funding reductions, achieving the budget target will require identifying areas for service level reductions. The Council will need to make some very difficult decisions. Overall, the total forecasted increase for external agencies is 5.4% before provincial budget impacts. To facilitate the achievement of the budget target, we are recommending that the Peel Regional Police, Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and Credit Valley Conservation Authority report to Council in June on the risks and potential service level adjustments to achieve their respective budget targets. This slide summarizes the key dates up to and including the proposed dates for budget deliberation, with the first date being November 28th, where Council will be provided with the budget overview along with regional service presentations, followed by presentations from the external agencies on December 5th. December 12th and 19th have been set aside for additional budget deliberation if required. Before I conclude my presentation, I want to highlight an additional recommendation not included in the accompanying Council report. Since some of the changes in provincial funding are retroactive to April 1st, 2019, staff are recommending to advocate and work with the mayors and regional chairs of Ontario, commonly known as MARCO, to advocate for funding to mitigate the costs associated with transitioning to the changes in provincial funding and cost-sharing models. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, and I have a list of speakers, but I just want to emphasize one of the closing comments that you made, and I quoted it verbatim. Council needs to make some very difficult decisions, to which I added ... against an uncertain and sometimes retroactive provincial landscape. So these are incredibly challenging times, especially when the province says the work that you did last year and your budget for this year, we may carve into that. Seems very unfair when that work has been done and that's dedicated and allocated. It's hard to go backwards, but these are the challenges we face and many more. I have a long list. Mayor Thompson.
Thank you. Well, just doing quick math with, it's a total of 48.3 million we're talking about, and if you take the 0.8 off, that's a plus to us, it comes to about 47.5 million that we already know about at this point in time. I know in the budget book it said that they were going to do seniors dental, but we haven't heard anything yet on where we're going with that.
I have no additional information other than the $90 million that the provinces have announced, unless you've heard anything else, Nancy? No.
But I'll take that as a no. Going back to the paramedics, I think this is one, and I know I said it, AMO, and we worked very closely with MEPCO and LUMPCO and everybody at the table. I would really, I would endorse the motion going forward on this, but I would really like to emphasize if we can get the paramedic example to show what the impact is going to be on Peel for the next 4 years. And I would really ask if we could get the paramedics and their union to support us on this as well, because I think it'd be really good that we do it to a two-prong approach. I know there's quite a movement in Eastern Ontario, but I really think Peel is one of the biggest employer of paramedics, and I think we need to take a stand, and I think we've got the facts behind us to do that if we could. Is that a possibility that we can ratchet that up? I would really like support, and could we share that with AMO so we have something to push back with?
Through to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. We are happy to take that back and continue our discussions with union, as we are, as well as with AMO. So we're working very closely with both parties and happy to continue that and bring forward a report as part of this discussion.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely important that we start to push back with facts. If this is a government that's listening, they have pulled back on a few things, but I think we need to send a strong message. We already have our budgets in place, and you're looking at it 6.5 this year, but you times that by 4 over the next 4 years, that's 25 million. And how many more of these keep cha-chinging? And we're already, and I think we have to let the province know, and this is where the rural municipalities of Ontario that I chair of are pushing back. We're already paying the highest property taxes. Grey County and Dufferin County are at their limit. They can't afford to keep adding property taxes, and especially in the north. We're paying the highest property taxes actually in all of Canada, not only that, North America, but yes, I do understand Americans are a much different animal than what we are here, but still the same. That is something that we all should be ashamed of, and now we're going higher again. I know the previous government were saying, well, municipalities, we're in debt, so you can handle debt too, and I know we push back hard on that, but this is not changing. It's still the same. It's a different government, same policies coming, and I think we have to start pushing back with the facts. So we have to start telling our story, and I'm really asking, we've got to really push the advocacy extremely strong, not just at AMO, but I think we just need to start to go public to let the public know this is the impact that's going to happen to your property taxes. We're all property taxpayers. So, Mr. Chairman, I know where we're going with this motion here, and I know you have this regional chairs provincial funding, but I would like to have AMO added to it because that's who we all feed up through, if we could. And I understand that it is in that motion if we could put it up, but I think it's very important that we push hard on the advocacy that it's the municipalities, and we're already at the limit now on property tax, and now you're doing this, plus governance on top. So I think we need to really push hard on this.
Agreed, and thank you, and the clerk will coordinate that accordingly. Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Chair Unique. I can't agree any more with Councillor or Mayor Thompson. We have to push back aggressively on this. I think we saw with the wastewater that when you do advocacy, it can make a difference. You look at the cuts to autism when children stood up and families. Those cuts were diminished. They were not as severe as originally intended. Right now, there is a growing chorus of voices against these cuts, and you look at Cam Guthrie, the mayor in Guelph, you look at John Tory, they're waging a very visible campaign. We didn't have all the facts at first, and it's great that we have the extent of what this means, but this is massive. You know, you look at the provincial government says they're for the people, and they said it's about reducing the tax burden on Ontario families. That's their mandate. Well, they're about to suggest what would be a record tax increase. Have we ever had an 8% tax increase at the region? They're proposing a record tax increase. How can that even come out of their vernacular? We have to get that out to the public. I think they're counting on the fact that municipalities won't push back. And if we don't push back this year, it will be worse next year. They want to find new fiscal space, and they're trying to find out where they can push it, where there's not going to be opposition. And I think, similar to what we did on water, wastewater, I think we need to have a coordinated advocacy campaign here. Frankly, I think our voice has been missing from this debate. I know we've made some comments to the media, but not in a fashion that's been coordinated like Lumco or the mayor of Toronto. And so I hope that we can have a resolution that can come from this that will equip the region to do our own advocacy. The reality is we have 8 government members in Peel Region. They wouldn't have a majority without this region. We have a minister in this region. And these 8 members need to know the consequence of this proposal. But I'd almost even go further. If we're going to be, it's one thing to do newspaper ads or social media. Every service they're going to cut, I think we should inform those service agencies of what the provincial government is proposing. For example, on wage enhancement, let the employees know who are affected that the Ford government has proposed this and we're advocating against it, but that wage enhancement is now at risk. Work on the assumption, knowing that we're not going to have no one around this table I assume would stand for an 8% tax increase. Let all these agencies know that the provincial proposal actually puts this service at risk. So if you mention to employees who are affected by the wage enhancement that they would be potentially a consequence of this provincial decision. When it comes to early learning and childcare, let those critical, those families know that may be affected, that the provincial motion affects them. On the homeless prevention initiative, let the community know what's going to be affected. It's one thing to hear homeless initiatives. It's one thing to hear, early childcare, but once you actually have a name in our neighborhood of what program is affected, what program is potentially on the chopping block, it brings it back home a lot more. And so I think we need to specifically outline and publicly state what programs would be at risk. Prisoner transport, like in what world would they not want to fund prisoner transport? Yeah. And so when the Premier is going to John Tory saying, look at your own books and find efficiencies, are they telling us they don't want us to fund prisoner transport? We'll say to prisoners, you do it on your own. Would trust you. Show up at the court. It's ridiculous. And so, but when it all happens together, it can get lost in the noise. And so I think we need to, and I look to you, Chair, and to the clerk of what would equip the region with the ability to do some advocacy on this. But I do think, knowing the mentality of this government, if there's not pushback, it will be worse next year. And if their terminology is centered around the taxpayers, well, we need to have a two-pronged approach. One, show that this would be a massive cost for taxpayers. And secondly, let all the groups know that who are potentially affected.
Very well said. Thank you, Mayor Brown. Councillor Raz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, where do I start? It's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not downloading, but in a sense, it's downloading the debt and deficit issues from the province on the backs of the municipal taxpayer. Thank you for the presentation, Norman. I will be sending this to my local MPP, so they're aware of our local situation. And the, we haven't at the lower level looked at what our tax increases are going to be at, so it's compounding the problem. When it comes to paramedic services, this one, it was a little bit disheartening to see this because of our aging population, and those response times are not going to be met if we're at 2017 service levels. So I don't know with our expansion plans, and I know I have 2 new paramedic stations opening up in Ward 2. What happens to those? What happens to our service levels? There's a whole host of negative outcomes that are going to result of this change if we don't top it up with the property tax base. I heard this morning, the wage enhancement piece, was that just for the early years and childcare section? I heard this morning on the news that the province was considering a wage cap for all public sector unions. I don't know how that would impact on the local municipal level. I don't know if you can comment on that.
So through the chair, the wage enhancement piece in the presentation was specifically geared towards early childhood educators. We are mandated to provide a $2 per hour top-up to try and bring their wages in line with those of early childhood educators in the school boards and other areas. So that is still mandatory. We will have to do that. We're just not going to be receiving the full funding for it.
Okay, so that is different than what I heard this morning. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. What else did I have here? And I know we've been trying to keep a tally. Jeff Jackson from the City of Mississauga has been trying to keep a tally of all of these changes. And I think perhaps putting both the lower tier changes, and there haven't been too many as of yet. I know we're looking at the development charge changes. That's probably been the most significant, but that's really a go forward approach. So we're going to need the whole picture, and I think we can't make any budget decisions until we get that whole picture. I think for the province to retroactively make changes to our budgets is very disingenuous and ridiculous. When you hear them say there's only one taxpayer, but yes, it's exactly the case, and that's the problem with this. You're just unloading your issues onto ours. So clearly, I know that when I have my budget town hall meetings every year, that this is not an acceptable number, and you're right, Mr. Chair, we are going to have to make some very tough decisions and look at our service levels across the board, and I don't know where to start. So thank you for the presentation, Norm, but I'm not happy with what I'm seeing here, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Parrish.
Yes, I would like us to be proactive on the dental for seniors, because I think Toronto and Peel are the only 2 areas that do seniors dentals, and we've been covering the cost of it entirely. Back when we started it, we looked at the Toronto model, which was large clinics with paid dentists and lots of equipment, and we chose to go another way, which was to set a fee schedule slightly lower than what you'd pay if you went in with insurance. And we have individual dentists participate, and then they bill to us. It's a way cheaper way of doing it. All the money's going into dental work instead of heating a building and cleaning it and all the equipment that goes into it. So I think you need to prepare, or someone needs to prepare, a detailed letter to the Minister of Health. Because when I looked at the first announcement, it said that they were going to fund clinics, and that would take us out of the loop. They obviously don't like Toronto. They've been beating them up quite nicely for about since they got elected. They have no reason to beat us up. So that I think we need to make sure they understand our mode of delivering seniors dental care is cheaper. It helps young dentists, because then the senior that goes in will recommend that dentist to their family. So we need to build a good case and send it in so that they don't jump over us and say we didn't fit the pattern that they've designed. So that's one point. I was part of the Chrétien government when we had to do massive cuts in 94 and 95 budgets. And the reason we had to do it was we were about to be taken over by international monetary funds because we were really in bad shape. And we did a really good job for, at the first year we were elected, making sure the Canadian public knew what the trouble was. So when we made those cuts, everybody ducked their heads and waited to die, and nothing happened. The public accepted it. That's not how they've done this. They've just walked in and said, there's a huge budget, we're going to cut it, and we're going to decide where it's being cut. We're not going to talk to anybody about it. So I think two things. When I was on council before my sabbatical, we were sending $66 million a year to Toronto for social services. When I got back, that was phased out, and our budgets were easy breezy. We were going through 1%, 2%, 1.3% budgets here. The last couple of years, I think we've gotten a bit sloppy. I think that once that 66 million was gone, that obligation, other things have filled that space. So that part of the responsibility is going to be ours to come back with where we want our cuts to be, to bring our budgets in line. And we've got to pay very, very close attention because it really has gotten a little bit larger than it should. And there's some areas where we're spending money where we probably could cut. But I agree with Mayor Brown. I think we have to put on a concerted effort to make sure our taxpayers, I take a full page in a local paper, except we don't have one. It's worth buying a page in. But I think we need to do something to show that chart that says this is how much your taxes are going to go up. And it's going to be really significant if we all do the same thing. We set up a page, send it in to all the papers that we can send it into. Hit the Toronto Star. It's expensive, but we could do a full page in the Toronto Star saying this is what's happening out in Peel. And thank you very much, Premier Ford, for hurting our people. But I really want that dental piece to go in because I don't want them to make a decision and then have to go back on it because they won't. So make sure we've got a really good system here.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Norm, for your presentation. I feel as though the communication strategy that we engaged for our development charges and the concerns over the change of the development charges was actually more than what we're seeing here today. And the reality is that this piece actually will have long-term, far longer-term reaching consequences than that of the development charge issue. And I think Mayor Brown said it, when it's just going to compound annually. This is going to get worse and worse. Every budget that comes out, we're going to feel it more and more. And so I think that we really do need a more substantial communication strategy on this issue. And I think we need to go even one step further, not just notifying the groups that are going to be directly impacted, those providers and those organizations, but we need to impact inform our residents who are using those services. They don't know. They have no idea how this is going to impact them, and they don't know because, quite frankly, most of us sitting around this table still don't know. We don't have all the answers. There hasn't been communication, and I think that we need to start getting that message out, and there needs to be a far more substantial advocacy plan than what we see before us today on how to get that message out. Newspapers are great, but we need social media, we need town halls, we need teleconferences, we need to do everything that we possibly can because this is very far-reaching. These are going to have huge implications on our residents and the services that they deliver. And at the end of the day, it's going to be us that are going to be standing there and they're going to say, this is your fault. So I don't want to point the fingers about whose fault it is, but our residents need to be given the information so that they understand because they're the loudest voice. We represent 1.5 million people, and it's time that those 1.5 million people understand the implications that are coming down the pipe towards them. So while it's great that we have what's in front of us today, I think that I would ask staff to take a step back, that we need to have a far more aggressive advocacy platform than what we see here. This is not enough. This does not go far enough.
Thank you. And to that point, Councillor, you'll see that further the comments of Mayor Brown, that we've inserted a further and further that I think is on your screen, and further that staff develop an advocacy plan and campaign and report back to the next meeting of Regional Council to elaborate on exactly what you've said. You can all speak to that accordingly as well, but I think that's a big step in the right direction. Thank you. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Norm, for the presentation. And I want to support Councillor Parrish. And Councillor Parrish, thank you for advocating for that seniors dental program many years ago, and I think it was a great program. I have a lot of my seniors that use it, as I'm sure you do, and so does Brampton. What I would suggest is we do have a dentist on staff, I believe. Yes, okay. So I would get him involved to sort of put something together to reinforce the importance of seniors having teeth, good oral hygiene, good teeth, because it impacts them in a whole other, in a different way, or in a very complex way as well, because if they can eat properly, they can't, they're malnourished, and it causes a whole bunch of other problems. So my suggestion would be to get him to write something just to emphasize the importance of that. The other thing, Chair, we have a fair share committee here, I think, and we have a poverty.
We did, we don't.
We don't anymore, okay. But we do have a Peel poverty group, I think we do. You know, I think they need to get, okay, yeah. I think these are things that they need to get involved in, because we've been underfunded here at the region for several years, and we've been knocking on the province's door saying, well, you know, you're giving us growth every time, but you're not giving us the money. And I don't think we're at that point yet where we were caught up in having our fair share from the province. So I think these cuts is going to just sort of compound the problem even more so. So I'm in agreement with Councillor Innes. I think we need really strong advocacy for this, because it is going to impact our citizens. Cutting social services, there is a growing need, and I think, I'm sure the Commissioner could provide that, but I'm sure that we've seen an increase in residents needing more assistance in the social services department, whether it's for homelessness or whatever it is, but it has a huge impact on the quality of life for our residents here in Peel. So I'm with Councillor Innes on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Brown.
Just to add in terms of quick ways to develop public awareness about the consequence of these cuts. I think what could be included in the campaign could easily be those suggestions could go to staff. I know one councillor said, you know, maybe an ad in the Toronto Star. I enjoy reading the Toronto Star, but remember the government we're dealing with. We have a premier that says he doesn't read the Toronto Star. I'd almost take a look at how our message could reach this government in a fashion that will get back to them. I know they're big on social media ads, and so if there's an opportunity to get the messaging out on Facebook ads. We've had real success with teletown halls too. We had our cannabis teletown hall had 12,000 residents participate. Our one on regional governance had 5,000. You have an in-person meeting, you might get 20, 30 people out. People have busy schedules. I think a topic as important as these cuts, if you had a region-wide teletown hall, I imagine you'd get 20, 30,000 people on it. And so I just say this, give some thought to the ways that are the most effective of reaching the largest audience here locally in Peel, but also look at the fashion in which we can reach this government. And a traditional ad purchase in a medium that they don't utilize may not be as effective.
Yes, to be considered in terms of what campaign comes back. Thank you. Councillor Fonseca.
Yeah, I have to press that button, sorry. Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Yes, I echo everything that's been said here today. I have a question for everybody. How many people have attended or been invited to attend a meeting with their MPPs as of yet? Anyone? Anyone? So I've attended a couple of open houses at the MPP in my area's office. I've attended some different meetings with seniors, with service providers, with Board of Education, where the MPP has also been invited. And it's interesting that the questions that I get posed to me are, how come you keep increasing our taxes and lowering our service levels? And then the MPP gets up and it's like, oh, thank you for cutting increases to our tax dollars. So there's clearly clearly a disconnect between what the people are perceiving in terms of what we are providing them, and the services and the quality of services that we're providing them, and what's happening at the provincial level. There's clearly a disconnect. So I would agree with a much stronger advocacy, but I think that we have to also find a way in that advocacy to hold the MPPs accountable. Because if we just go to, and it's been said by a number of the councillors here, if we just go to the residents and say, you know, this is what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to cut this, and this is going to be the impact here, of course they're going to blame us. Whereas if we go, if there's a way that we can advocate or hold the MPPs accountable and educate the MPPs in our own wards or ridings on the impacts that this is having, I don't know if they are, I don't think that they're aware of these impacts. Or maybe they are aware and they're just passing the buck. But I think that that has to be part of the advocacy plan, because it doesn't matter what I stand up at, whatever the event is. It's like, oh, thank you to the MPP, and oh my God, I can't believe as a councillor you're doing this, and cutting that. So to say service level options and risks, we're already seeing to the point about the dental care, to the point about whatever it is, early childhood education. We're at the service levels that are being provided right now. I get complaints and concerns, I'm sure all of you do. I just think that in the advocacy plan, we need to find a way to hold the MPPs accountable, because they need to be accountable, because the cuts that they're making, these are cuts that they're making, decisions that that they're making that will impact all of us. And the only other question I have is, I don't know if the impacts here are these the most up-to-date impacts that the conservation authorities have said, or do we have a report from them on the impacts? Because I believe that, at least for the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, we're hearing there's going to be greater impacts than what's represented in here. I know this is probably just a preliminary estimate, but I think it would be great if we could have something to them. Typically, we have them come and present in June, but even if they could send out a preliminary forecast sooner, that would be great.
The acting CAO may have a comment on that point, please.
Through the chair, thank you. Just in regards to what I'm sensing from council, a wish for a strong campaign, and it was similar to what communications put together for council on the water, wastewater DC issue. And in that, it did include how to hold the MPPs accountable, so providing MPP contact information. So I'm sensing that's the direction that council would like to go if this motion gets moved forward. So if that's not, then we can clarify before you decide on the vote.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson.
Thank you. The issue that I have is the province said they're going to find efficiencies line by line. Their efficiencies is downloaded to the municipalities. And you notice, you look through the chart, it's the most vulnerable programs they've downloaded to us. So they leave us to, if we can't do it, we're going to say no because we're the closest government to the people. We got to make them own it. We cannot own it. It is being dumped on us to turn around and say, well, you know, if your municipality says no, well, I'm sorry, you know, we did. What they're trying to do is deflect it to us to be the bad guy, and we cannot own this. This is the responsibility of the province. We're doing their work at their cost, and I'm sorry, this is totally unfair, and we got to push back, and we got to push back hard, and we need to educate, as you said, Chris, we got to educate the public. They need to know what's going on here, and we're doing a provincial responsibility, and now they're telling us if we say no to this, they're going to hurt because it's our fault. That's how it's going to turn around. That's their way of finding efficiencies. I'm sorry, but we really got to have a good campaign and making them own this. We cannot own it.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. And I recall downloading housing paramedics. And I think when we had it downloaded to us, it was a 50-50 split. It took a long time for the province to get to their 50% in helping us with paramedics. So and we had to take on the burden of that financial end of it and the impact financially. So, you know, and I recall when we did the advocacy against the pooling dollars, we did a very strong campaign against that. And we may want to look at what we did last time and sort of kind of do the same thing this time, because we did have all the MPPs here. And I know Councillor Parrish was pretty tough in leading and strong in leading that advocacy group. So we might want to look at that. The other thing that I just want to bring to our attention, and I didn't see it in here, but if you recall, there was an announcement about the funding cuts to flood mitigation. I know that Councillor Santos and we chair and vice chair the Emergency Management Committee, and there was a presentation made to us last Thursday, and it's going to have a huge impact. And again, my residents are still dealing with the aftermath and the financial impacts they have on them. And so cutting the funding, I don't think that that's a really good idea. So we may want to include this in the advocacy piece because it does affect people's quality of life as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Well, I know Chris knows this. Putting pressure on, or educating or putting pressure on the MPPs by us is going to do absolutely no good at all. First of all, they have to get their nomination papers signed by Mr. Ford. So that's in the back of their minds. Secondly, they're all very competitive to get parliamentary secretary positions and committee chair positions and go on trips and get into cabinet. That's why a health advocate like Christine Elliott is allowing this to happen. That's like Jekyll and Hyde as far as I'm concerned. So the discipline within a party caucus is ironclad. You know that, Chris. So educating them is good. It's not going to do any good. Judy Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott can tell you what happens to people who take a stand. No one talks about them anymore. They're far, far gone. I think the pressure has to be from people. And we have to skip over the MPPs. We can name them and say these are the evil people that are doing this. But we have to get their constituents to yell at them so they take that message back to Queen's Park. I'm not going to waste my time talking to the MPPs in my area. I'm biting my tongue. I could say something more, but I won't. The psychology, yes, I am being nice today. The psychology in year one is be brutal, and then you ease off by the time the election year rolls around. All you announce is all the money you've saved. So all these things work. The only way to fix it is to put a monkey wrench in it now, straight to the people who can scream and yell at their MPPs. And they go back to Queen's Park a little bit shaking in their boots and saying, you know, we're in a lot of trouble out there, boss. But educating MPPs, waste of time. They are terrified of Ford, if they're anybody at all. And part of me is mad at the Liberals because they set this all up beautifully. You agree, Mayor Brown? Moving on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just want to echo the same sort of message that Councillor Parrish has shared. I think we need to go straight to the residents and the people of the region. And I'm going to evoke some words from the Mayor of Brampton, which he's been using around some of the regional governance discussion, which is that at the end of the day, there is only one taxpayer. And when we start to complicate, or in our communication and advocacy to the people, once we start doing this outreach, we have to make it as simple and clear as possible. And I do like the idea of the fact that there is only one taxpayer. So if the province downloads all of these costs and expects the region and municipalities to pick up the tab, the residents need to understand that there's only one taxpayer. And in fact, there is no cost savings to the province because it's the municipalities through property taxes and everything else that's going to have to pay for it. So throwing back to the same sort of Ford strategy and Ford message box like the gravy train. We have to keep it really simple when we're out there getting to the residents. And I do like the idea, the fact that there is only one taxpayer and the residents are going to have to pay for it one way or another.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros.
Just along, I guess, the thought about engaging with our stakeholders, I think our union representatives, I know labor groups around, especially here at the region, are concerned. So I think we should engage with them too in getting our message to their members. I think also diversity communities. If you look at a lot of our MPPs, they come from certain ethnic communities, and it seems our outreach with ethnic media when we do these campaigns seem to be bypassed. And so I know when I'm on Portuguese radio, regional governance is still, people don't understand it, hasn't been explained so much. So hopefully any type of targeting or campaign that we really do look at all the sort of ethnic media outlets, especially here in Peel, considering our high diverse populations.
Well said. Thank you. Mayor Brown.
So maybe a question. The prisoner transport, what do we spend a year in prisoner transport, just to get a sense of the significance of the $2.6 million cut?
So through the chair, the current expenditure level is about $9.6 million.
So we're talking about 25%, 30%, yeah. 30%. So if we said to the province that for 30% of the year, with this cut, we're not going to do prisoner transport, are we allowed to? It would cause the courts to go into chaos. Maybe the solicitor can give us some advice. Are there services that we're mandated to provide and have no choice? Or as part of our advocacy, we could really show the province the consequence of what they're doing. When they say find efficiencies, we don't have the choice to find an efficiency when it comes to prison transport. And so we could give a few of these examples.
My recollection is that the prison transport obligation is a statutory obligation. We're required to do it by law.
And if it's not funded?
It's partially funded.
So if, hypothetically, if we were to say we were able to provide the prisoner transport for 70% of the year, but because of provincial cuts that for those 4 months, we'll be unable to.
That's right.
So we could simply say it's on hold until the funding is restored.
No. You would be in breach of your legal obligation in that scenario.
And what's the consequence of that?
I would want to get back to you on that.
Well, but we're talking about the impossible choices they're giving us, and so we have to show. If they're saying to municipalities, don't raise taxes, and then they're saying we're taking funding away, what is the scenario if this funding is removed from all the user groups, and see how long the MPPs can sustain that consequence? If the local, Crown attorneys and the media are hearing that judicial issues aren't even being attended to because of the government short-sightedness, we're worried about drawing media attention to the consequence of this. If the judicial system shuts down because of the short-sightedness, well, that's a little bit more explosive that will get on their radar. But a lot of people out there are so busy with their own lives, taking their kids to soccer, sports, or going to work each day, they don't really realize what the provincial government's doing. But if you hear they're putting at risk prisoner transport and shutting down the court system for 4 months, well, everyone would hear about that. And so I want to know exactly, and maybe you can get back to us for the next council meeting, exactly what rights we have. Yeah.
Thank you. Moving along. Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, thank you. we can't be the only regional council in the GTA having this conversation. Would it be possible to, as we're formulating a communication strategy, to speak to the other regional chairs, what they're up to, and broaden it out a bit?
The answer is yes.
Thank you.
That most assuredly is the intent, yes, amongst many other initiatives. Yes, thank you. Councillor Demerla.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I really like Mayor Brown's idea. It's very innovative and it sends a message in ways that social media and stuff can't, because then it becomes a media story. So even if we never went through with it all the way, just the threat is such a great story. I really would like staff to come back with a way to do it. I know that it's not easy and there's legal risks, but to find a way to thread this needle, I think this is the most effective way of fighting back.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish.
I kind of like the idea, except what I think is going to happen, I think you're better off to shut down transportation a day and a half a week rather than shutting it down for 3 months. A day and a half a week would do it. And the other thing that's going to happen, though, for the law and order Tories at Queen's Park is the court cases are going to back up. And a lot of people are going to get off because they didn't get tried in time. And that would be an unexpected consequence if you didn't think it through carefully. So when you're looking at this plan, and I've come up with some crazy ones myself, and they work sometimes, look at doing it a day and a half a week or 2 days a week and just see what it will do to the backlog in the courts and how many criminals will be back out on the street free as a bird because, Peel Region didn't transport their prisoners. So just make sure we look at all of that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. For those of us who survived on the school board in the 90s, this is all very deja vu. Living through big cuts where you're going to do more for less and less for more, and et cetera. We had every angle from the Harris government. Those were horrible days. Eventually, the fever burned out because really you can't make cost cutting or tax reduction very sexy for very long because people start missing those services. And as I recall, with the cuts to healthcare and education, the moms really got together because it was their duties in those days to do most of that kind of work. And it wasn't very popular, even though they supported the tax cuts. So I had this sort of schizophrenic approach from people saying, boy, we love these cuts, but man, when are we going to get back our ECEs in kindergarten, and when are the special ed programs restored? And I said, well, you voted for these idiots. What did you expect? You're mad at Harris because he did what he said he was going to do. So a little schizoid thinking there. So eventually this fever will run its course. And we'll restore some kind of middle-of-the-road, typical Ontario, bland Bill Davis stuff that actually works for the people of Ontario. Nobody likes this austerity, and it's short-lived and it's ill-advised, and these days will pass. I certainly lived, it seems like 25 years ago to me. But I did have one suggestion for the good mayor's suggestion on the taking prisoners. Maybe we can do like we do in the school board, a walk to court day. And you get their exercise and so forth. It could be a good environmental message too. And we all meet on the corner of Main and Queen, and I have one in Streetsville, you have one in Brampton, and off we go. And we'll just walk up to Brampton Courthouse or down to wherever the one is, Mississauga. We may have a little fun with this because these sort of futile gestures have a way of getting reported in the newspapers and presents to the public the ridiculousness of trying to pretend that you're going to deliver more services for less money, which I wish I'd ever seen that in my 30-some years in this business. But, it will pass, I can assure you. The public will become very sick of this nonsense in the not-too-distant future. And hopefully we'll all be around to enjoy the happy days that are ahead. But until that time, I join with the mayor in supporting your future motion to reduce transportation. It's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. How wonderful that my last speaker is the old sage of council that said it so well. There is a great line in the years that I've been around that I love, and I have to credit Mayor McCallion for it, Hazel, when she said, I think the first year I was in public office, learn real quick, Nando. The federal government has all the money, the provincial government has all the power, and we have all the problems. And that's what you're finding out, and it has always been thus. I think one of the big problems we've had, and you've enunciated, it was a very good article, I think it was the Monday Globe and Mail, where it was the head of the Treasury, the member of Provincial Parliament, and the Cabinet Minister, I've forgotten his name. But where we lose in some of the battles is, you're right, the bullet points that they make, where at the end of the article, they said, and at the end of the day, we're the province of Ontario, and every day $40 million more goes out than comes in. Tough to argue against that. The average, I couldn't run my household spending, and those are because I've had that thrown back at me this week. And that phrase, subnational debt, was in the same article. Get rid of the nations of the world, the Italys, the Frances, etc. And other than those nations, the next highest debtor in the world is the province of Ontario. And people have thrown that back at me. Those are the talking points that they win on. I keep telling you I'll write the book. I'm going to give you one of the secrets of the book, and you've spoken to it today in terms of advocacy against government. What we are doing here, by and large, isn't just a large waste of time. In other words, here we are at a debating club amongst ourselves, and if they're watching on TV, they say, oh, good, those minion, they're just arguing. It's not just that. Listen to me very carefully on the fine point. Not only are they listening to us and saying, listen to those minion, what they're saying is, we're winning. Because the trash was thrown on us, and here we are trying to shovel it away, where at the other end of the spectrum, government at the end of the day is about allocating scarce resources. Where they are today is giving out those resources somewhere else and getting a pat on the back. And they have us dealing with this. The point that I'm making, and Mayor Brown and all of you are absolutely correct, the extent to which we are advocating is the extent to which we are losing. Our job, and you've said it rightly, is to advocate to our citizens and have them storm the palace gates. That's the only way that we win. I've come, because that is what they will respond to. And again, I want to make the fine point. Us arguing amongst ourselves, ours meeting with the MPPs, they're not saying it's a stalemate. They're saying we're winning because they must be taking all the heat and we're taking the benefits of giving a bigger slice of the pie to some. It doesn't get better than this. We've got to let them, oh, you're not talking with us. So we closed the clinic and just put a sign that says, we're closed thanks to Rob Ford, you saved 12 cents today. You got a problem, go tell him in Queens, whatever the case might be. That is the problem, and we have to make it their problem. And I see the sense that everybody understands. So I would hope when the strategy comes back, the advocacy, how do we educate our constituents and say, this is where the rubber really hits the road. And that is a marvelous segue into the next subject that we're going to have. But before I go in, I need Councillor Parrish and Councillor Ras to move the report, and we're going to vote on it. All those in favor of receipt of the report? Thank you, and thank you. Oh, recorded vote, I apologize, yes, because we're on the consent.
We're on this.
And I was going to deal with we'll deal with both. The motion has been moved and receipt of the delegation as well. We're voting on this resolution as well in a recorded vote. Thank you. I thought I said it was moved by Councillor Parrish and Councillor Ras, I believe. Oh, sorry, Mayor Thompson was first. Mayor Thompson was first, and I think Mayor Brown second accordingly. Yes. On the motion itself before us, moved by Mayors Thompson and Mayors Brown. Recorded vote, please. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. And that leads me into my segue for the presentation that we're going to get for the modernization of Ontario Public Health Units from our Medical Officer of Health, Jessica Hopkins. And the point that I would make is she's coming forward further to the conversation that we had. Do you know, at the end of the day, whether we're talking about a road, people still think the road will get paved and plowed. It's services like this that matter to our constituents. And many of you know me well. I don't have sleepless nights. I'm a very lucky man. I'm very content with life. The one thing that keeps me up with regional business is this file. As I said to the Medical Officer of Health this week, that I said, I don't know how we will deliver public health to our constituents in the years to come. This is what really matters. And that's why I'm glad it's here. And this is what we have to have the province and the users understand to be our advocates at the province. So what a marvelous segue. Dr. Hopkins, please proceed.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, Regional Councillors. I'm speaking to you today as the Board of Health for the Region of Peel, and I'm going to be speaking about the implications to you as the Board of Health as well as Peel Public Health based on the province's plans for modernizing Ontario's public health units. But to begin, I'd like to start on actually a happier note and remind all of you that this week is actually National Nurses Week, where we appreciate all of our colleagues in nursing and the fine work that they do to deliver programs and services. And so I have here with me one of my colleagues, Natalie LaPaz, who is a nurse and supervisor at Peel Public Health, and she's going to start by telling you her story about finding meaning and impact in health and healthcare.
Thank you. As a registered nurse, I began my career at a major Toronto teaching hospital where I worked as both a nurse and a nurse clinician specializing in post-operative wound care. In those roles, I saw many hard things that really stay with you, things that didn't need to happen, preventable conditions that altered and sometimes ended lives. And one of the stories that really stayed with me is working with a patient that had elective bariatric surgery to help her lose weight. Through the course of surgery, she had many complications, including a heart attack. It resulted in her having many stays in the intensive care unit and ultimately requiring a tracheotomy to breathe. Her life was impacted. She was left with significant long-term health impacts that were completely preventable. And it was cases like that and working with patients like her that really made me frustrated that no matter how good a nurse I was, I could never prevent my patients from experiencing the suffering that required me to be their nurse in the first place. And all the while, the patients just kept coming. I thought a lot about what I wanted the impact of my work to be as a nurse. I wanted the impact to go beyond the person that was receiving my care. I wanted to have an impact on preventing the illness from happening in the first place. And I wanted to have that impact at the level of the community and the population. And at Peel Public Health, I've had an opportunity to do that. I joined the built environment work, or I've been involved in the built environment work at Peel Public Health since 2015. And I can tell you without reservation that this is the most important work that I've been involved in. With Council's leadership and support to advance the health and built environment work, we're actually changing the circumstances in which our Peel residents are living their lives. Not only for today, but for generations to come. I work with a highly skilled team of professionals that are looking at ways that we can incorporate health into our broader regional work. We work across regional divisions with different stakeholders to ensure that when we're making investments in infrastructure in the region, that we're also making investments in the region's health. One of the key roles of my team is to review health assessments that are a requirement of development applications in the region of Peel as a result of ROPA 27. And through that process, we work with development stakeholders to make real changes to proposed developments to ensure that the communities that we're developing today are going to support the health of Peel residents. And I can tell you that there's been real change that we've seen through this process. We're seeing things like additional pedestrian crossings, shorter block sizes, more formalized crossings, improvements in streetscaping, also that our Peel residents can walk safely and comfortably to where they need to be as part of their daily lives. This work is not frontline, and like much of the health promotion and policy development work that are the core functions of local public health, the impact of this work is long-term and ensures that our residents continue to thrive and not just survive in Peel.
Thanks, Natalie. I think it's important to remember that there is a full breadth to public health scope of practice that includes things that we're often familiar with, so many of the things that you'll see here on this slide, which is about protecting the health of the public. But in order for communities to truly thrive, we need to do the kind of work that Natalie's team supports as well. So I'll remind you of what the changes that the province has announced are to date. So they're overall looking for $200 million in annual savings by 2021 to 22. And when you look at the three different buckets that are really there of the changes that are being made, they're being made to structure, funding, and governance. So from a structure perspective, we're going from 35 local public health units to 10 new regional public health entities. With respect to funding, the policy is currently 75% provincial funding, 25% regional municipal funding. However, this, as of April 1st, 2019, is shifting to 70-30, and on April 1st, 2021, will shift to 60-40. And as you all know, Regional Council has invested to make up for the ongoing underfunding from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in order to meet the needs of Peel's residents. With respect to governance, currently you are the Board of Health. However, in the future state, there will be autonomous boards of health that will have municipal and provincial representatives. I'm concerned about cuts to funding in public health because public health saves taxpayer dollars. For every dollar that is invested in public health programming, we know that we save $8 in health and social care costs. And these studies that have been done are done in high-income countries like Canada that have universal health care. So this is very applicable to our context. There are a number of other studies, some of which are in the appendix as well, but they all consistently show that if you put money up front, and this goes back to the idea of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, if you invest a smaller amount now, you save a bigger amount later on. So staff have taken a very thoughtful look at the evidence as well as previous reports from public health crises to understand what the impacts are of modernization. And when we think about a public health sector that's going to be strong to support our communities, what are those core elements that we are going to need? And there are three of them. So the first is public health has a distinct upstream population health and disease prevention mandate. This is complementary to what happens in acute care and primary care and is necessary to the overall health of our population. The second is that public health needs to have sufficient funding and human resource capacity to fulfill its unique mandate. This is a specialized area of health, and we need to have the health professionals who can fulfill those important roles. And thirdly, that public health is maintained at the community level to best serve residents and lead strategic community partnerships. And I know all of you have been involved in and know about many of the partnerships we have with the municipalities, with school boards, with police, with local community agencies, and those are the things that make a difference in people's day-to-day lives. So these are the recommendations that are with the report. They cover off the important elements that we have identified through the literature, and we certainly welcome further direction from Council as the Board of Health on additional work that might need to be done in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions at this time? Councillor Downey.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I actually don't have any questions, but based on the conversation that we just had in terms of advocacy, I think that I'd like to make the suggestion that although the recommendations that you put forward are good and very diplomatic, I think that it may be the will of this council in this table to adopt the recommendations of Marco as our own. They are a little bit more robust, and I think a little bit more straightforward on the advocacy piece, and I think that that's what I'm hearing around the table from my colleagues, so I would put that forward.
Thank you, and I understand the sentiment. Is there some way in which we could adopt this recommendation and the others and have the others go forward? Or I think we can have the best of both worlds. But further comments on that thought? I have no other speakers, so I will entertain a motion at this time. Would that be all right? That why don't we endorse these recommendations, and then in terms of our advocacy position, endorse the position of Marco? And is that fair, Councillor Downey? That's been moved by Councillor Downey. It's been seconded by the Mayor. It is a recorded vote on that direction. All those in favor, please vote at this time. And that is carried. Thank you all. Thank you very much for the presentation. Moving on to item 8.3, Community Investment Program Review related to item 17.1 and a presentation by Sonia Pace, Director of Community Partnerships. Sonia, welcome.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Anika and members of Council. My name is Sonia Pace, and I am the Director of Community Partnerships in the Human Services Department. Joining me this morning is Melissa Toney, Supervisor of the Community Investment Program. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with some context and understanding about the Community Investment Program, more specifically, the intent of the program, the level of investment, and how this supports Peel's not-profit sector. This presentation also accompanies the Community Investment Program Review Report in today's agenda. This slide depicts how and where we invest. When we first designed and relaunched the new Community Investment Program in 2013, we ensured that the program was responsive to the challenges that the sector was facing. This result was a program unlike any other funding model being offered to the not-for-profit sector in Peel. We recognize that financial sustainability of the not-for-profit sector is challenging. Most of the funding available is program-specific. This creates a reactive environment for agencies as they dedicate resources to compete for funding while struggling to maintain operations that can weaken their focus on program delivery. As such, in order to address these challenges, the Community Investment Program focuses the region's investments on the sector and organizational levels to strengthen core operations. Our investments then work their way down to support the programs and services and ultimately the residents of Peel. The Community Investment Program is the foundation for which agencies can stabilize and strengthen organizational functions. In essence, we provide the backbone needed for agencies to perform better, delivering effective programs and producing measurable outcomes. Peel's not-for-profit sector is an integral part of the human services system. These agencies are really regionals partners in responding to the needs of our residents. Our investments focus to strengthen the nonprofit agencies in 3 key ways. The first key area is investment supporting core operations, and we really like to refer to these core operational needs as a way to help the agency keep the doors open and the lights on. Some examples include rent, occupancy costs, utilities, accounting costs, and administrative support. This funding enables management to focus on program delivery and this delivery then helps them execute their mission and their mandate. It also provides their ability to pursue funding from additional sources. The second key area is investments that support the development and strengthening of the internal business practices, such as organizational strategic plans, board recruitment, board training, leadership succession, and performance measurement and evaluation planning. And the third key area of investment is to enable collaborative partnerships amongst agencies that address system-wide issues. One example of a successful collaborative included a project that developed a place-based intervention which supported diverting street-involved persons from going to emergency rooms for non-emergencies. I'll pass it over to Melissa for further information.
All funded agencies, gotta turn it on, sorry. All funded agencies in the Community Investment Program are required to report on an annual basis the details of how the funding we have provided was spent and their progress in meeting the agreed-to program outcomes. Staff analyze this data, and it is used to measure the impact of our contributions on the not-for-profit sector and the community. This slide is also included as an appendix in the Community Investment Program Review Report. We have taken data from the agency reporting received in 2017 to demonstrate the impact of investments from that year. In 2017, the Community Investment Program invested $6.8 million in 98 agencies that provided 649 programs that reached over 290,000 Peel residents. As a best practice, regular program review and engagement with the not-for-profit sector allows us to ensure that we remain agile and responsive to emerging trends. The latest program review was implemented in 2018, and findings demonstrated that our funding model continues to have a substantial impact on the not-for-profit sector and the community. The review has also found areas where the current program can be enhanced. While the program philosophy of building the capacity of the not-for-profit sector by supporting core operational needs will remain, program enhancements will be implemented in the following areas. Greater alignment to regional priorities. Investments will now be focused in agencies that are aligned to and can support the advancement of one or more regional strategic priorities. Through the program review, agencies expressed the need for clarity about funding maximums and allocations to better understand how much they can expect to be able to request and further understand how their allocations were determined. In response, we are now articulating funding maximums for all funds and implementing a funding formula for core funding allocations based on a percentage of an agency's operating expenses. This formula will allow allocations to support a portion of these costs proportionate to an agency's budget. New and innovative funding models. We intend to continue support of collaborative partnership and innovation with investments that allow for the use of evidence to create targeted service delivery approaches across the community. In addition, we will be exploring social enterprise through a 2-year pilot initiative to better understand the role of a municipal funder in creating opportunities for not-for-profit agencies to support residents through employment and skill development. As we continue to support our not-for-profit sector through these investments, we must acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our community agencies. It is through the relationships that have been nurtured and developed through consistent, open, and transparent communication that has built trust with our program. We have only been as successful as we have because our agencies have felt safe to share their areas of improvement and development, which has been the basis of our program. Approaching a funder to discuss organizational challenges can create a feeling of vulnerability. We have encouraged agencies to understand that we are here to provide support and work with them in order to meet the goal of creating a community where Peel residents can live and thrive. Members of Council, thank you for your time this morning. We will respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, and we have Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. So I used to work at Imagine Canada, working with nonprofit organizations, dealing with social enterprises, finding collaborative ways to get folks to work together in the nonprofit sector. And one ongoing thing when I worked there was the core funding and the need for core funding. So I'm happy to see a lot of the success here in the CIP at the region. Congratulations. I have a question. If you could just share an example of some of the social enterprise ideas that are on the table right now that this pilot project would help in the next 2 years. That would be great. Just curious to know what social enterprises are here in the region.
There are actually a few social enterprises happening. So part of our review, staff did an environmental scan to have an understanding of what projects are already in place and what other investments are helping to support these projects. So right now we're aware that United Way of the Greater Toronto Area is supporting some groups. There is a social enterprise project, and I apologize, the lead agency is escaping me, but it has to do with the mattresses. So it has to do with repurposing mattresses or...
Yes. Yeah, there's, what our focus will be is definitely to support, oh, I'm sorry. Our focus is to look at definitely our community members that would have difficulty finding employment. So we want to sort of have an employment focus for our members in the community. And currently, there are a few social enterprises in Peel right now. One is called Options, and it's a printing company. You may be aware of that. They are looking for expansion as well because they're specific to one group, and they could expand more. So we have a lot of different areas that we're looking at and a lot of research going on. But to your point, there is a need for some core funding. That is sort of the success to enterprises.
And so I bring this up because as we're looking at cuts and downloads and the impact that the province is going to have, there's going to be a lot more pressure on our nonprofit organizations
Indeed.
and things like this to kind of deal with the gap in some potential service cuts that would happen either at the provincial or the regional level. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and well said, Councillor Owino. With that, I'm going to ask you, Councillor Santos, if you could move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Kovac, that the recommendations from the Community Investment Program Review as described in the report of the Commissioner of Human Services titled Community Investment Program Review be endorsed, and further that the program enhancements described in the subject report be implemented in 2020. And further, that the Commissioner of Human Services be delegated authority to approve the allocated budget funds in accordance with the Enhanced 2020 Community Investment Program guidelines. And further, that the Director responsible for Community Investment Program be delegated authority to execute agreements and other related documents with the recipients of the Community Investment Program funds on business terms satisfactory to the Commissioner of Human Services and on legal terms satisfactory to the Regional Solicitor. You've heard the motion, a recorded vote. And that is carried. Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, moving right along. That brings me down to items related to enterprise programs. Chair Fonseca.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There's one item of communication, 12.1, that was held. RF Powers Chair, Niagara Escarpment Commission. I believe Mayor Thompson held the item.
Yes, I would, so we've conferred, and I want to make sure we got good representation within the Escarpment area. So we would like to put forward Councillor Downey,
Yes.
Councillor Kiernan, because we have to pick three.
Yes.
And Councillor Early. And Councillor
Okay.
Gross, you'll second it?
That's great. So this is a recorded vote.
Sorry, that was
Through
just
to the
two.
clerk.
So the
that
clerk
was
is
just-
clear. I understood that was 2 names?
We need three. We need
Oh,
Downey.
Kiernan
Could-
and Early.
oh, okay. Keelan Early
Could
was
Mayor
one name.
Thompson
Thank you. Thank you for the
Good.
clarification. Madam Clerk, we have our 3 names.
Have
That
3
has
names.
been moved by, oh, sorry, back to you, Chair.
moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Groves, and it is a recorded vote. Yes, you can. You can vote for yourself. And it passes. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Moving right along, down to Health, Chair Downey.
Our first item is item 15.1, vector-borne disease update, held by Councillor Raz. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Question to staff. I think in addition to some of the spikes in Lyme disease and also West Nile virus, one of the areas that we're seeing are, and I know Peel Health is directed towards humans, but we're seeing a lot of pets that are affected more and more by the ticks, especially the dogs. And I'm wondering, as our residents probably want more information on how they can maintain their properties, and or if they see things on their pets, they should be able to also report, because those could eventually impact humans. So I'm just wondering what we're doing in terms of public communication on managing those types of things.
Sorry, wrong button. Through the chair. With respect to surveillance, we have a couple of different types of surveillance that occur to determine the ticks that are existing in the Peel region. So there's passive surveillance where people bring in ticks, and we only accept ticks that are found on humans. And that's because it takes quite a long period of time to get them tested. They're not useful in terms of dictating whether or not someone needs treatment. They're strictly to understand numbers of ticks. The other thing we do is we actually go out in the Tyvek suits, and we have these long pieces of white cloth that we drag through the areas where ticks like to live, and we conducted those and have found established tick areas. So now that we have established tick areas, we know that they are here, and passive surveillance, that idea of bringing ticks in to be tested, is actually not that useful. So in health units, some are actually stopping doing that. We're not at the point where we are recommending that, but we won't need to do it over the long term because we know the ticks live here now. The positive thing is the ticks that live here now are not showing Lyme disease when we test them, Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. However, we will continue that dragging activity to determine if it happens. We do have information on the website with respect to how homeowners can look after their properties. And we can, certainly as the spring months open up, we tend to do more over social media at that point in time, and can certainly work with our colleagues in veterinary medicine to ensure ensure that information is getting to pet owners as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Tis the season, and I will be including that in my next regional newsletter. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson.
Yes, there's a couple of residents in Caledon that do have the Lyme disease that have been affected, and especially one gal that in 2009 was finally, diagnosed, treated in New York last year, and she's now out of the wheelchair and was able to walk to where her husband works at the farm, from the house to the barn. Big achievement for her this week. The question I have for it is the challenge we have with the medical profession is, well, we don't have ticks that have Lyme disease, so it's not here. People are testing positive for it. We got to find, is there any way we can ask the province to help people to be able to get some of their costs covered for treatment? It's unfortunate they have to go to the States for treatment, and it's a crippling disease. And there's two people that I know of that are, in wheelchairs that are created from this disease. So they are residents, they are taxpayers. Is there anything that we can do to advocate for them?
So through the chair, so Lyme disease is a significant disease, and we absolutely have concern about it. All testing and treatment that is based on evidence and recommended by numerous professional bodies is covered within the province of Ontario. There are a number of different tests and treatments that have not been well studied and are not recommended, and some people do choose to pursue those, but everything that is based in science and evidence is covered in Ontario.
So with people with having this, I think this is where they're getting pushed back in the medical field. Who can they reach out to if they don't feel they're being heard? Is it your office then?
So through the chair, with respect to individual patient treatment, that is through their family physician or other healthcare provider in order to determine what kind of testing they need. Public health does not provide direct testing or treatment for patients with respect to Lyme disease.
No, I'm not saying, no, I guess I didn't explain myself. It isn't about treatment, it's to the avenues. Because all of a sudden when they say, well, that's Lyme, well, we don't have that problem, so we don't have the funding for it. So when did this change that you can get tested for it? Because I know this has been a challenge by some. They've had to go to the States to get tested to show it's positive. They couldn't get it done here. So has something changed in the last number of months then?
So through the chair, this has been an ongoing debate in the public. So in Ontario, we use what is considered the gold standard for testing, which is two-stage testing with respect to Lyme disease, and it is highly accurate. There are a number of tests which have not been studied, have not been validated that they are correctly diagnosing the disease, which are available in the United States. I would point you to the Centers for Disease Control website, which speaks to these specifically about tests that are not recommended. The recommended test in the United States is the same that we use here in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Starr?
Yeah, I want to follow up on the testing mechanism with the two-part question. With the ticks themselves, and who does that? Which agency or which group, or, we keep referring to testing and results. Who does that?
So through the chair, first ticks are identified, and then black-legged ticks are sent to the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg in order to be tested for Borrelia bacteria.
Second part is that if somebody is perhaps considered that they have already Lyme disease and the blood work is tested and whatever, where is that tested?
Through the chair, testing in Ontario occurs through Public Health Ontario Laboratory, which is provincial.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my experience now. About 2 years ago, I had this mystery disease, and they thought it was fibromyalgia. They thought it was other things. It was just a mystery. I was at Credit Valley several times, and I tested positive for Lyme disease. Had no other symptoms. But the director of communicable diseases there said there's something wrong here. I want to send the result or your blood work to the U.S., someplace in New York. Came back not positive. I mean, there was complete, sent it again, same answer. But yet in Ontario, I was tested positive. And even with the medical profession that I guess they hinted at, the system that we have in Ontario is not accurate.
So through the chair, we use the same testing that the Centers for Disease Control in the US uses. There is no test out there that is perfect. And in terms of when you are interpreting tests as a medical professional, part of it is based on what the epidemiology is. So has the person actually been exposed? What are the test results, as well as symptoms and signs? And sometimes there are additional tests that may be done for specific circumstances, and I don't know the details of your circumstance, but certainly the testing that we do here in Ontario is the same as what the CDC recommends in the US.
I just related that experience, and you know, it was fine in the end, and the mystery went away. But the point is, I always had that doubt about our system here, and the problem. I guess part of the problem is that yes, I do go north fairly often, and yes, I have brought home ticks, and you know, never ever worried about it. But when you go through an experience like that, to this day, I say, okay, do we have the best system right here? The system, never mind that the standards are the same, do we have the best system?
So through the chair, at this point in time, this is the system that is recommended by the experts in microbiology.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Starr. Councillor Innes?
Thank you. You'd mentioned vets. Do we actually track or have any sort of communication with the vets when they do diagnose a dog that has contacted Lyme disease through a tick?
Through the chair, no, we don't. We don't have any jurisdiction over pets.
I know we don't have jurisdiction, but I think we could probably open the lines of communication with the local vets, because if those vets are finding Lyme disease in those areas, I know I took my dog actually yesterday who got a tick on her face, and he said that he removes ticks daily. It's very common. He has multiple cases throughout the day, and there are quite a percentage of them that actually come back positive for Lyme, which would be beneficial for us to know here if in certain areas there is Lyme disease. Is there a means to at least reach out through public health to those clinics within our borders to have better communication between the two?
Through the chair, yes, we're very happy to speak to the vets and receive that information if they are willing to share it.
I think if we ask, they would probably be more than happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Innes. Moving on to item 15.2.
You just need a motion to receive, Councillor Downey?
A motion to receive item 15.1, vector-borne diseases, moved by Councillor Grove, seconded by Councillor Raz. All in favor? Thank you. Item 15.2, Menu Choices Act compliance, also held by Councillor Raz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess this is one of those things. What is our regulatory obligation to do the health inspections related to the caloric information?
Through the chair, the Act does require us to complete these inspections.
But now there's no funding associated with it.
Through the chair, that is correct.
So I would make a recommendation that we no longer do it. At the end of the day, when it comes to caloric information, I think the onus should be on the companies. And if you're going to a fast food outlet, you know you're eating fast food. But you can, almost all the nutritional information is covered online. I know for some of the smaller mom pop shops, but this is one of those cases where it comes back to the provincial government and the de facto downloading. They make the funding changes, but the regulatory requirements still exist. So they're not doing it in a way that makes it more efficient. In fact, it makes it more burdensome on everybody. So I would move a motion that could be sent back to the province that because this particular instance, it's not being funded by the province and it was never part of our core business before this act became enacted, then we cease to inspect businesses just related to the caloric information. We will continue obviously to do those health inspections, but I don't see the need to do this anymore if the provincial funding isn't there.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Through you, Mr. Chair, might I suggest that since we have been asked to report back on the implications of non-compliance in the context of the prisoner transportation matter and perhaps other matters, that we might also take that matter into consideration and give you the implications before a final decision is made?
If you want to be nice, sure, we can do that.
Just a further suggestion to Councillor Raz's piece is that chains under or just over 10 have to report the caloric menu options. My suggestion would be that maybe we don't do it, but it gets put back to the corporations, to the Tim Hortons, to the McDonald's, all of the large chains, that it's actually up to them to carry that out with their franchisees. Sorry, Councillor Demerla.
It's my understanding that the role of public health is to just check that the information is correct, but it is the onus of publishing that information does lie with the private sector. So they will continue to do that because they're legally obliged. The piece that, as I understand it, is public health has a role in making sure that that information is indeed correct, and someone is not saying that their muffin has only 20 calories when it actually has 200.
Through the chair, Councillor Demerla, you are correct that this is just to determine compliance. There is also an additional requirement to respond to complaints that the public may have with that. And I was wondering if I could seek direction from council about, given the motion, Councillor Raz, if you would like us to continue to respond to public complaints. There are not a lot related to this area. I believe we've had 2 since the Act came out. But as staff, we would certainly support responding to complaints from the public without the inspection piece. There is additionally, besides the motion that you've made and the coming back, as Patrick has said, there is soon to be determined process where boards of health may seek waivers from the province for not doing things. And I would suggest that perhaps this could go through that process as well, if you would like that.
Thank you, Dr. Hopkins. And we'll have, I just need receipt. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you would like to actually defer the report rather than just receive it, and that way it'll come back to the attention for the address that Dr. Hopkins talking about, perhaps on that list, and Mr. O'Connor's report back as well. So if we defer it, we'll keep it on the attention. Okay.
Okay,
so it's a motion for deferral.
Moved by Councillor Raz, seconded by Councillor Demerla. All in favor? Deferral move. Thank you.
Thanks very much. On number 17, items related to human services, chaired by Councillor Medeiros.
Actually, we're going to go back to item 16.3, Councillor Pelletier.
Oh, right. It's just written in here very small.
Yeah.
Councillor Pelletier? No? It says 16.3 Pelletier.
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm just discussing the Ministry of Health long-term care added item 16.3 letter received from Minister Christine Elliott. I guess I have a couple issues with what actually this is and who it's addressed to. It's as stated, it's addressed to Frank Dale. Received May 9th, 2019. Brampton's received approximately 400,000 so far from Brampton's option to opt in to allowing the storefront retail, and the Region of Peel has now received upwards of just over 800,000. This additional 123,000 states in here that it's to support cannabis enforcement, but then on the other line is subject to terms and conditions. Can I get somebody to kind of fill me in on what this actually is with the limited information that this is?
So through the chair, in 2018, Public Health had submitted to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care requesting additional one-time funding in order to support the increased work related to cannabis becoming legal. This dates back to, this ties into that request, and it is to go to funding for public health to enforce the Smoke-Free Ontario Act, which includes the cannabis regulation as well. The terms and conditions are just part of the normal public health funding and accountability agreement for our regular cost-shared programs with the province, as well as the 100% provincially funded programs.
Okay, so, and walk me through, I don't know what we're going to actually be able to do with 123,000, but in terms of, I believe we utilize the municipalities to do a lot of the enforcement, although we do have some enforcement here at the region. So where are we looking to allocate this funding specifically?
So through the chair, this is one-time funding for 2018-2019. So in fact, the period in which you had to spend the funding had passed by the time we received this notice. This funding goes to the public health role around Smoke-Free Ontario Act enforcement and the work that we do specifically. And because the region picks up the underfunding from the province, this will offset the regional funding portion that you pay extra for the public health budget.
Yeah, no, that's muddy. So I guess I'm still confused as to, because there's not a lot of information in this letter. And it talks about the actual enforcement. The money's already spent. I guess specifically, I would need to look at line items in the budget to actually see where the funding went. But it's specifically around enforcement. So there's nothing we can use or nothing we could have used for this to be as a part of the education process at all?
So through the chair, enforcement is graduated enforcement. And so we don't, for example, lay charges right away. Part of it is education with operators, for example, or individuals in the public who are smoking in areas where they're not allowed to smoke. We always start with education first. So from that perspective, enforcement is a broad word, and it is not just ticketing and court costs.
Okay, so using the broad word of enforcement, was this funding enough funding to do what we needed to do in the last period?
Through the chair, I would have to go back and look at the budget line. I believe our spending was above this amount, but I could certainly go back and look at it in detail. I apologize. We only got this letter late in the day yesterday. I'd be happy to bring more information back, though, for you.
Okay, so maybe I'll request that more information come forward to future council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pleshy. Councillor Santos?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. This 123,600 is over and above what they had originally proposed?
Through the chair, there was originally no additional funding for cannabis enforcement included in our base 2018-19 budget.
Okay, so this is in addition to?
Correct.
And did all the various public health areas get this just as additional funding regardless of who opted in and who opted out?
Through the chair, we don't know that at this time, but it's certainly something I can find out because they will become part of the public record.
That would be great when it comes back. Thanks so much, Doctor.
Do you need to receipt? To move receipt of item 16.3, moved by Councillor Pleshy, seconded by Councillor Santos. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Pleshy. It didn't go unnoticed that Frank Dale may have run off with the money, but I'm going to make sure that if I get it, it gets deposited here. So I'll tell the minister when I see her tomorrow at an event that I think we both will be at, but thank you. All right, moving on to item 17, items related to human services. Chair Medeiros isn't in his chair, so I will go to Vice Chair Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 17.2, update on the strategy to address human sex trafficking in Peel Region. Are there any questions?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wanted to take a moment. I don't have any questions, but for the just for my colleagues around the table, yesterday, Peel staff were able to update the human trafficking service providers table with the good news that we endorsed and supported the housing pilot for the next 3 years. So we will have a safe house and a transitional house operational this fall, so in 6 months' time. It was great, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Ms. Morrow and her team up there. They did a great job in pulling it together, and received a really nice round of applause from the Service Providers Network. And just a thank you to my colleagues around the table. As we have discussed this morning, we'll be facing some impossible decisions to come, but I applaud all of you for standing up and doing the right thing when we need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downey. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. I know that we're going to the province for funding, but is there any role that the federal government could play in here in terms of funding as well?
So through the chair, to date, the role or the responsibility has been with the provincial government. We can certainly look into that to see if there's any possibility of securing funding through the federal government, but it has mainly rested with the provincial government.
Okay. I'm happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. Councillor Fonseca.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to Councillor Grove's question, at the last FCM meeting, there was a discussion under supportive housing, the supportive housing file, and in terms of advocacy for supportive housing in the situation when it comes to human trafficking. And this was an advocacy piece as part of the FCM board voted to include this as part of an advocacy piece for municipalities. I don't think it was specifically referenced in the budget, but a number of ministers, so there is a table of ministers that come together to discuss housing, and they spoke to the opportunity to continue to work together with municipalities right across. This is a concern right across the country for obviously for municipalities and regions and for the individuals. And so there is expressed interest in moving forward to look at funding specifically to address this and support surrounding that.
Thank you. So for the recommendation, do we need a recorded vote? Okay, so moved by Councillor Groves and seconded by Councillor Downey. So that carries, and then that concludes Human Services. I'll give it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Moving right along, that takes us to other business. Item 19.1, update by the acting CAO on the status of the Ernst & Young work relating to the provincial review of regional government. CAO.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I provide that update, I just want to provide a little clarification with respect to Norm's presentation this morning. With respect to the police funding cut of $2.6 million, the full amount isn't for prisoner transport. $700,000 of the $2.6 million relates to prisoner transport, so it's probably about 7 or 8% of the prisoner transport budget. Just because I know that was a part of the discussion, I just want to make sure it was clear. This information is flowing to us rather quickly, and Norm was just looking at the total envelope.
So, you can explain that. So, what's the other part of the 2.5 million?
What the province has done is amalgamated a whole bunch of different funding pots into one. I think it'll give the police more flexibility, but it's a lower amount in total. I don't have the details on that. That'll be something that I would imagine would come to the Police Services Board.
So it's $2.5 million cut to the police.
Correct.
$2.5 million cut to the police, but so what's the other 1.75 million? We don't know.
I don't know.
Can we get that information for next week?
We can certainly follow that up.
Thank you. Carrying on, Stephen.
So, carrying on. So, the work with...
Perhaps, Councillor Demers, you had a point on that point. Please, you have the floor.
I was just thinking that following up on Mayor Brown's idea, and I think Councillor Raz was trying the same thing with the caloric information. I wonder if staff could actually, for next council meeting, provide a list of tangible services and the funding that's been cut to see where, if we wanted to go with such a strategy, if it's not prisoners, then what else? So instead of us trying to figure it out one by one, perhaps you could come back with a few suggestions where you can very clearly tie the funding to a particular service that has some retail value. Thank you.
Back to you, Stephen.
And certainly we can take that as direction, and we'll bring that back. So
Perhaps Councillor Parrish again on that point. Carry on, Councillor
Yes, I
Parrish.
was also going to ask, we've had a lot of construction around City Centre, and we see police officers sitting in cruisers with their lights flashing. And as the traffic jams up, the only one I've ever seen get out of the car and direct traffic was a female police officer. Yay. Those are paid duty. Are they regulated? Could you check to find out if there's some other way they could do that? I know I once said here, and it caused great consternation, that there has to be a better way of directing traffic around construction sites. There have to be bonded people that can do this. Could we check that as while we're doing it as well?
Councillor McFadden, we're moving along, but I'll give you a quick rebuttal.
Thank you. Just a quick one, and that is, I understand, Councillor Parrish, that the police service for this is paid for by the construction company. It's not paid for out of tax dollars.
You're correct, and before I go back to Stephen, Councillor Parrish, you were right. There were a few cars there yesterday as I made my way through, but there were two very well-intentioned officers that were on the street guiding us accordingly yesterday afternoon at around 3:45 or so. A lot of work going around at City Hall, though. It's good to see. Back to you, Stephen, carrying on with your update with regards to the Ernst & Young working program.
Thank you. So the work with Ernst & Young and all four municipalities to analyze the financial impacts to potential service delivery models, the three that Council had asked for, status quo, amalgamation, and dissolution, is well underway. The work is progressing, and everyone is doing what they can to have the report to Regional Council on May 23rd. While we're making best efforts, it is too early to tell whether or not we can achieve that timeline. It's going to be very tight, to be honest. We would like some feedback from Council this morning. If we can make the 23rd, it will be with little or no time to spare. If we can circulate any material in advance, we will do that. Would you be comfortable having the report walked on to the agenda on May 23rd with a full presentation on the material by Ernst & Young at the meeting, because that may be the best that we can do? If we determine in the next few days that we cannot complete the work by that date, we will update you by email and advise you when we can expect the report.
Comments, questions, consideration. Mayor Brown.
So the deadline for provincial submission is May 21st, correct?
Correct.
And I know, Chair Nika, you've asked if there's any discretion with that? Yes. Have you had a response?
Yes, and I put the question to the two supervisors yesterday, and they were not confident that they would get that leeway from the provincial government without being able to make a definitive commitment. You may know the supervisors were here for the open house yesterday, so I took a moment to have a cup of coffee with them on a couple of issues, and that was one of the issues, and let's just say they were not supremely confident that we're really given, not that they didn't want to agree with us, they have their own political masters and it's the province, and I just didn't get a lot of comfort that they'll be extending deadlines.
So the challenge with a walk-on is that at least if it was provided, even though we didn't have a chance to discuss it, at least if we have a copy of it prior to May 21st, when we make submissions, we have the ability to do so. What day you would normally have to get us if it was not a walk-on? Like, is it possible to have it for May 20th?
The process would be that you would get it a week ahead, which would be the 16th, but I don't think that it's going to be ready, what I understand.
If it was 3 days ahead, then at least you're up before the deadline.
The contract with Ernst & Young required that they complete the work by May 21st. everybody is pushing as hard as they can. We'll have a much better sense early next week. We do have another steering committee meeting this evening following council, and we'll get a clearer picture there. But I think early next week we'll have a much clearer picture as to what status they'll be at as of May 21st.
Well, if we have
I mean, they're contracted right now to complete the work for May 21st, and we're holding them to account for that.
Okay, well then I think that's important, and I think everyone would be, as long as we have a copy of it prior to May 21st, it doesn't need to be a week, but if it was May 20th, I think that at least achieves. Having said that, if it's not done in time, then I'm satisfied with the findings of the Deloitte report, and we will, and that will be our submission. But as out of fairness to Mississauga, since there was doubts on Deloitte, that's why we did this process. But just be very clear, then if that's the case, if it's after May 21st, Deloitte is the only financial analysis done by the region, and it will be our submission as fact.
Perhaps we'll have some discussion around that. Further follow-up, Stephen?
Yeah, through the chair. The work is targeted for completion to the steering committee on May 21st. What the steering committee has agreed to, unless the steering committee needs to endorse the work before it goes to council, so that we're not bringing a product to council that council doesn't feel comfortable with. So each of the 4 municipalities will be reviewing that. I mean, we're going through each meeting, looking at assumptions and getting consensus on the assumptions that are being applied. So that work is progressing nicely. It's unlikely, I don't expect you'll see the report prior to the 21st, because the steering committee will get it on the 21st.
Do I still have the floor, Chair? So the motion said in consultation with the 3 municipalities. And the reason we used that wording, and I know because I was the one putting the wording together, was that if one municipality said, you know what, I don't like the results, I'm not supporting it, the terms of reference were set in consultation with the municipalities. And so you give it to the steering committee, and they can pass it on to regional council. Whether they endorse it or not, I don't think that's necessarily consistent with the motion. The word consultation is not required approval.
Thank you. We'll hear.
I just would point out that this exercise would be wasted funds if we don't have it prior to May 21st. Then no one's in, I don't think anyone around here that would want to waste funds as part of this exercise.
Point, a lot of moving parts to it, but point well made. Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I support and agree with Mayor Brown's comments. I just offer up maybe the opportunity for flexibility in the dates that we meet, whether it be whether we need a special regional council meeting. I think that we need to provide that opportunity with you know, this important decision that we have before us. If that's the one item on the agenda, I think. But to give that opportunity to you to have in your pocket, hopefully helps in providing us with the information prior to the submission.
Thank you. The other point that's come up, and it's never done it recently, but we certainly have the right to do it, to call a special council meeting as well. But of course, the trigger is, does the entity have the report to us in time? But it's a big issue, and we've got to get it right. Councillor Palashi, anything further?
I want to make that sure that it's clear that you have that opportunity, and if I need to put that in a form of a motion, that through consultation of the regional chair, that you hold. You can just call a special council meeting, so you don't even need that. So I didn't even need to speak.
But I certainly,
thank you very much.
But I certainly want to hear the thoughts around the table, and I appreciate yours. Mayor Thompson.
Well, we do have meetings slated for the 30th, right? So we do have our May 30th.
The 23rd.
23rd, but isn't there one the following Thursday? Because I have it in my calendar held for
Those are committee meetings?
committee meetings, but we can even add that on to the committee meeting if we needed to.
We have regional council on the 23rd.
Yeah, I know it's on the 23rd, but it's to make the deadline if we're finding that tight. And I'm sure, Mr. Chair, I would reach out. We're trying to make this deadline, but it wouldn't hurt to reach out to the Minister, Municipal Affairs. He's a reasonable individual. Just tell him, look, we've got a lot of dollars and a lot of expense, but I think you'd really appreciate it. can you, if you just give it, because they know we're trying to meet a deadline, and if it is within a week or two, I'm sure they'll should give us some compassion to give us the room that we need.
And I'd be happy to make that call and think it's a fair request if it comes to that. Stephen, did you have a thought on that, or can I carry on with my list?
Just to confirm, through the chair, the existing provincial deadline is May 21st. The request from the chair was to give us till May 31st, which would actually then allow for a May 30th council meeting. So I guess that really is the question of, and I think you gave the direction in terms of following up the minister directly.
I suggest just pick up the phone and make the call.
Very good. And I think that's a good advice. Councillor Demerla.
Lots of moving parts. Here are my thoughts. Sometimes there's a draft to these as well. Perhaps if there's going to be a final report on the 21st, I can guarantee you there's a draft around the 19th. Perhaps that can be shared with us. I am quite concerned if we don't make the 21st deadline. I don't want the other report to be by default presented. And if that were the option, then I would very much want a motion that would say that Mississauga had these concerns and a minority report or a dissenting opinion on that report and our concerns with Deloitte's findings, because I think that would only be fair.
And I think you raise a very fair point. Councillor Parrish.
Well, I can't believe we're sitting here talking about whether we're going to send a report that's cost $660,000 on top of the $350,000 we wasted. It's over $1 million. How many seniors' teeth could we do for that? So the report has been agreed to by 4 bodies, the premise for it. I have no problem with that report going in without my even seeing it. Ernst & Young have been hired. They've been given the criteria. What are we going to influence? Are we going to ask them to change a couple of T's and dot a couple of I's? We paid for this. It's the most scientific one that's been done of the 2. And I think if it has to be in by the 21st, I also think the 6th largest city in Canada could put it in on the 23rd and nobody's going to throw it in the garbage. So this thing needs to be done. If you want to see it here, bring it here. But I would move that the report, if it comes in exactly on the 21st, gets sent to Queen's Park as the position paid $1 million for by this body and voted on. And I'll make that a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. Further thoughts? Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I agree with Councillor Parrish that we can just send it straight away. No problem. We've paid a lot of money for it. And also, I don't think we should give the province any excuse that we didn't have anything to say because we missed a deadline. We don't know whether or not they will be so compassionate. So I would support that motion.
Thank you, and I take that as a motion that is on the floor at the present time that's been duly moved by Councillor Parrish and seconded by Councillor Santos. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the mover of the motion also include that the report be made public on that same day? I love it. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Raz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would fully support the motion. I think last time we spoke about this, I said we're putting this money towards a very thorough professional report. We're going to have to live with the results, and we're not going to be changing it. So let's make it public. Let's get it out there to the province as soon as possible, and I would second that motion.
Very good. So I have no other speakers. I just want to be clear for the chair and through the clerk and the staff, so because I think you arrived at something that I think is quite workable. What we're saying is the report is the report that will come back. We're inspecting it to be in by the deadline date. We don't need to see it or approve it other than to say, Godspeed, it's the work we've asked for. Send it right to the province and everything is in order. And it should be made public at the same time. The chair is clear on what's being put forward, and I think that's a very good suggestion. Madam Clerk, are you satisfied with that?
And we'll bring it to the 23rd as well.
And we will bring it to the 23rd thereafter. Very good, Stephen?
That works.
That is the motion on the floor. Do I need a recorded vote? And I need a recorded vote on that motion moved by Councillor Parrish and seconded by Councillor Santos. Please vote accordingly. That carries in a very pragmatic approach. Well done, all. Moving on, item 19.2, an update from Commissioner Polzinelli regarding the local Ontario Health Team. Nancy.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to provide council with a quick update on the progress being made with our Ontario health teams. So as council is aware, the province has initiated a process of health system transformation that is reorienting how healthcare is structured and funded locally. With the eventual dissolution of the LHINs, local health service partners are being asked to create Ontario health teams, also known as OHTs. This includes mobilizing and coordinating integrated healthcare delivery for a specific geographic population, and that population is being defined by each Ontario health team. The deadline to submit initial expressions of interest for the first round of consideration is due May 15th, 2019. However, it's important to note that this process will be repeated over the next several years until full provincial coverage of Ontario for health teams is achieved across Ontario. So that would include about between 30 to 50 Ontario health teams in total for the province. The Region of Peel has been in discussions with both William Osler Health System and Trillium Health Partners, who have been facilitating planning sessions for Ontario health teams locally. As part of this shared expression of interest, local partners interested in forming an Ontario health team are requested to sign a memorandum of understanding. Presently, the region is signing a memorandum of understanding to establish an OHT covering the geography of Brampton, Bramalea, North Etobicoke, West Woodbridge, and Malton. And this is a process being led by William Osler Health System. We are also discussing appropriate involvement with the Mississauga Ontario Health Team, led by Trillium Health Partners, and most recently, discussions have begun with the Dufferin-Caledon Ontario Health Team, led by Headwaters Healthcare Centre. The MOU represents a good faith commitment to pursue a mutually developed expression of intent to achieve an Ontario Health Team designation with the province. It does not bind the region to be part of the OHT in future. Rather, what it allows us to be engaged in the process. It provides a platform to influence how local Ontario health teams take shape, and it optimizes the region's role within a new health system structure. Currently, councils and boards are not being asked to sign an MOU. However, as the process evolves, it is likely that at some point, the legal involvement with an Ontario health team will require council's endorsement and support. And a report will come to council before a binding agreement is considered. Until that time, staff will continue to work through the Health System Integration Committee and with council directly for support and guidance as we better understand and confirm the implications to governance, funding, and service delivery. And we will be discussing further details during our upcoming Health System Integration Committee meeting, which is on Thursday, May 16th. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on that? If not, thank you for the update. That concludes that component of the meeting. What I have before me now is a notice of motion, item 20. Did I need to move receipt of the, that was just information. Very good. So we're on item 20.1, motion regarding Federation of Canadian Municipalities resolution for the next term of council. And the resolution reads as follows. Whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipalities represents the interests of municipalities on policy and program matters that fall within federal jurisdiction, and whereas the FCM's board of directors is comprised of elected municipal officials from all regions and sizes of communities to form a broad base of support and provide FCM with the prestige required to carry the municipal message to the federal government. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Region of Peel endorse Councillor Fonseca to stand for election as the FCM's Board of Directors for the current term 2018 to 2022, to which I would add she's served us remarkably well up until now and is well deserving of that, if I may say. That is the motion before me. I have speakers, Councillor Santos and Fonseca.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And I was looking at this as I was going through the agenda, and I don't want Councillor Fonseca to take this personally at all, because I've heard from various councillors that indeed you've been doing a fantastic job. But I want to just ask a question, because I do have a concern. Mississauga publicly stated that they wanted to separate from the region. And I have heard about postcards and a campaign going out locally to residents in Mississauga about separating from the region. And you are a councillor from Mississauga. And you're going forward, and I understand that this wasn't the case perhaps before all of these issues regarding regional governance came to the table. But you are now going to, based on this motion to FCM, to represent the region and the best interests of the region. How are you going to do that, given the fact that, as a Mississauga councillor, you're campaigning to separate from the region?
Councillor Fonseca.
Through the chair.
Yeah, given that you were named and it was directed to you, I'll go right to you on a point of privilege if you would like to respond.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So, to answer directly, I have served as so the way the governance model works at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I'm there to represent the region of Peel, but also the local municipal orders of government. And keep in mind that I have served as the regional representative through a number of, shall we call them, trials and tribulations at the region of Peel in the past, whether it be for City of Brampton or City of Mississauga or Town of Caledon, advocating for a different format and breakdown of region of Peel councillor representation, whether it be because the province has asked us to come forward as a region to look at our governance model in a former term of council. And yes, I serve as a City of Mississauga councillor, but at the same time, I have proudly advocated in a number of different ways for the region of Peel, for municipalities right across the country, whether it be the Legal Defense Fund, which the region of Peel has benefited from substantially, the Disaster Mitigation Fund, which I was the lead to speak before all of the federal government on, representing municipalities right across the country. And we successfully, as you could see in this past federal budget, had funding that is being directly sent to municipalities, and in this case, the region of Peel, when it comes to addressing disaster mitigation. Universal broadband, which Caledon, Mississauga, Brampton will benefit from. Changes to notification of cell towers, which municipalities used to have to spend a great deal of funding for out of their own property taxpayers. A flexible modern government where now at the federal, territorial, and provincial table, there never used to be municipal or regional representation. There now is. Also, a national housing strategy, which applies to all of us. Yes, I do sit at the local level in the City of Mississauga. We're at a time where our provincial government has asked all of us to respond to a review of regional government. And yes, we are all involved in that. But at the same time, I feel that through different trials and tribulations, I have represented not only the regional model well in the region of Peel, but the issues and the impacts that face all of us as local order of government each and every day in not only in Peel, but at our local orders of government. So I feel that no matter what happens moving forward and no matter what the province decides, I will continue to proudly advocate for all of you, or all of us, and the matters that we face. It's really a matter of looking at federal and municipal respect and federal and municipal modeling. And in the time that I have been on the Federation of of Canadian municipalities, I've seen a substantial shift to now the municipal order of government being at the table when decisions are being made federally and also provincially and territorially.
Thank you. Councillor Santos, you still have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Fonseca. I totally appreciate all the work that you have done in the past. But as of today, if we were to vote on this resolution today, would you be advocating for the region to stay as it is today?
That is not something that is discussed at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As I said, it's advocating for funds directly.
Point of order has been put. Councillor Innes, what is, yes, we do.
There's a motion on the floor, and that is not part of this motion, in my opinion. I would leave it to the direction of the chair, but I think that that's an inappropriate line of questioning.
And that would, I don't think the two relate to one another necessarily, and so I would.
I'll reframe the question.
I'll allow you
So
to
as
try.
part
Go
of
ahead.
FCM, it's also our job as representatives to be lobbying board members, to be lobbying MPs, et cetera, about the interests of the region. And at this point in time, the interests of the region, right now, we are a region and we should be advocating for the region. Would you be doing that?
With all due respect, it is the role of FCM board members to advocate for local orders of government right across this country. That local order of government takes different shape and form, and I can very proudly say that I have done so to advocate, listing all the things I just listed in the last 15 minutes and beyond, to advocate for direct funding, sustainable funding to support local orders of government.
So the only issue, and I don't want this to be taken personally at all. The only issue then is that Councillor Fonseca has two different types of positions on local order of government. There's one position for Mississauga and one at the region. And so that is my concern, given the context that there is an active campaign going on the ground in Mississauga to residents that Mississauga should separate. So I just bring that up as a concern. I totally appreciate and acknowledge all the work that Councillor Fonseca has done. But as a representative from Mississauga, going on behalf of the region to FCM, whether that's FCM or AMO, there obviously is a lot of tension. I just want to make sure that when Councillor Fonseca goes to FCM, that it is, in fact, to advocate for the region.
Could I just quickly respond?
If you wish, or else I'm done, and I think it's
I'll
been
be
asked and
very
answered.
brief.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure, Councillor Santos, what you're talking about in terms of tension. I very strongly advocate, and actually through the relationships that I have built at the FCM table, Peel, whether they are staff or other councillors, are highly regarded. Whether it's highly regarded at the FCM table, at the Big City Mayors Caucus, at the Rural Caucus, at the Indigenous Caucus. So apart from what's happening here, because the province of Ontario has asked us to review regional governance, again, I will emphasize that my role at the FCM table is all the roles of those that are sitting at that board level is to represent local order of government, whatever format that may take, and the relationship between local order of government and the federal government and how sustainable dollars flow to make sure that our local communities are thriving.
And I will leave it at that and consider it asked and answered as best can be. I
Thank
have a
you,
list.
Chair.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And when we send somebody to you, when we send somebody to FCM, we're going to be sending a representative from Brampton to represent Brampton on the board of directors as well. When we send somebody on who represents the best interests of Peel Region. There's rural issues, there's big city issues, and so, somebody who's from a rural area will have a rural perspective. And when we send somebody from the Peel region, we want a perspective of what's best for the Peel regional residents. And I think it's a conflict that residents will be sending a regional representative who's working to dismantle the region. And I don't think it's in the best interest if a councillor who has that belief is sent. And so respectfully, I think it's a little bit hypocritical. And so what I'd like to do is, through you, maybe to the clerk, I'd like to nominate Councillor Santos to go if that's possible. How do we do that right now?
Clerk?
There is a motion on the floor now, so that the motion would have to be voted on first, and if the motion is not successful, a new motion could be tabled.
Is there no way that we can possibly amend the motion somehow to?
It would be contrary,
No.
certainly. Yeah, it would be contrary. And that is standard. You've made it clear that you may not wish to vote in this manner, and you're making it known you will bring an alternate motion if this one should fail.
Right, and I'm not discounting anything that Councillor Fonseca has done. I've been there with her. She's done a great job, but I think just in the current situation, I don't think it, again, in the best interests of our residents, I don't think it might be the correct move. So again, not taking anything away from you, but we'll go to the vote. We'll see what happens.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Well, I was going to amend the motion to add at the end, or until such time as she is no longer a regional councillor. If that happens before 2022, does that solve the problem?
I'm not sure it necessarily does. I think maybe
Then
that'll
I'll leave
just,
it alone
Thank,
and we'll
thank you. I
just-
think it'll just run its course,
Then
Skip, but I
we'll just-
understand the sentiment.
I will leave it alone, and I
Thank
will
you.
be supporting her 100%. Of all the soldiers we've got to try and separate from the region, she's the least active. She just has her nose to the grindstone. She cares very much about regional issues more than a lot of other people, and you've got my support 100%.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish. Councillor Thompson. Mayor Thompson, apologies. Mayor
I
Thompson.
think just a point of clarification now, why we get an appointment. Everybody has to run for election at FCM, very similar to AMO and everything else. What's unique about FCM is if you have a population over 1 million, you automatically get a seat. So basically, if Peel dissolves or Mississauga goes their own way, the seat's gone. Simple as that. You're here to represent 1 million people. That is the role. So I just want to clarify, I don't think a lot of people understand that. As far as still being able to run, we've always had Brampton reps and different ones that have run for the seat for the FCM, but you have to be there to put your name forward. But this is where only municipalities that have over 1 million, which is few, get to have a seat at the table. And that's one of the perks of Peel being who they are, is why we can have an advocate there naturally for us. You don't have to run for election. She's automatically appointed.
Thank you for that. Mayor Brown.
Thank you. That's a good point that Mayor Thompson makes of the advantage of being over 1 million collectively is that we get that extra voice. I don't think anyone would discount Councillor Fonseca's work ethic. I think everyone understands that she's a great public servant. When the chair, Unica, when you went from councillor in Mississauga to the chair of Peel Region, there was understanding that your job and responsibility shifted. There's a responsibility for the region of Peel. What I think Councillor Santos is saying is that, and I'm sure, I suspect that councillors outside of Mississauga would feel strongly about this, is that we have confidence in Councillor Fonseca's abilities, but our hope would be that when it comes to any meetings that happen on behalf of the region of Peel, that there would be no commentary that would be against the region of Peel, just like you have done so capably. And I think that's the concern that's being raised in a fashion that is respectful of Councillor Fonseca's longstanding contributions to FCM. And I think that could be taken the wrong way, and that's just want to highlight. We think we've got a great representative there, but there is concern given what's happening right now. You made it very clear that when you were the chair, that your job was to look out for the best interests and advocate on behalf of the region of Peel. And I think that's what Councillor Santos was hoping to hear, that there would be no mis-exit statements made at an FCM level.
Thank you for that. Seeing I have no other speakers, the only other comment that I would make is, if permitted as the chair, I could say, and I will say it, I would think from my experience, Councillors Fonseca, you've spoken to it, but I'll articulate it differently. I would suggest to you that as a town, as a county, as a region, as a city, as it relates to that level of government and the FCM at the federal level, the distinction doesn't matter much. Your city interests are our regional interests, are a town's interest. I could say that, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if I had one vote alone, based upon my knowledge of Chris Fonseca, and knowing the path that I've just walked these last 6 months, I unequivocally would be proud to have her there representing me and the region of Peel, because I know she will stand up and do the right thing. That is the thought I would leave you with. I will call the question at this time. It has been moved by Councillor Parish and Councillor Raz, and I've read the resolution already. I will take in as read. It is a recorded vote. Madam Clerk? And that carries. Congratulations, Chris. Thank you. Okay, moving on. That brings me to the bylaws. Madam Clerk? That the bylaws listed on the May 9, 2019 Regional Council agenda, being bylaws 33, 2019 and 34, 2019, be given the required number of readings, taken as read, signed by the regional chair and the regional clerk, and the corporate seal be affixed thereto. That has been moved by Councillor Kovac, seconded by Councillor Fortini. All those in favor? That is carried. And now we have to go in camera. So I have a resolution to go in camera, ma'am? We will move in camera, so those not required to be in for that session, if you could quietly make your way. And I consider the doors open and we are back in session. Coming from the in-camera, I have a resolution moved by Councillors Raz and Councillors Parish that the closed session report of the Strategic Housing and Homeless Committee meeting held on April 18, 2019 be received, and further, that the recommendation contained within the confidential report relating to item 22.2 listed on the May 9, 2019 Regional Council agenda be approved and become public upon adoption, and further, that the information with regards to identifiable persons be received. You have heard the motion. All those in favor, this is a recorded vote. Do you have a concern with? These are separate items? We're dealing with them all in one motion, but they are separate, the three separate items we dealt with. That is correct, Councillor Paleshi. You've heard the motion coming out of the in-camera. A recorded vote at this time, please. And that is carried. Thank you. On to the next, that the bylaw 35-2019 confirm the proceedings of Regional Council at its meeting held on May 9, 2019, and to authorize the execution of documents in accordance with the Region of Peel bylaws relating thereto, be given the required number of readings, taken as read, signed by the regional chair and the regional clerk, and the corporate seal be affixed thereto. That is moved by Councillor Fonseca, seconded by Councillor Groves. All those in favor? That is carried. And now just a motion, confirmatory bylaw. Do you have? We just did it. And motion to adjourn. Very good. It's been moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Vincente. All those in favor, that is carried. Thank you to all.